Rain hit the window of the law office in heavy, grey sheets. Hermione aligned the 3 quills on the desk. Perfect spacing. Exactly half an inch apart. She nudged the middle one. A 1/4 inch to the left. Better. Her fingers were shaking. She hid them under the desk. She was 24. She was a senior researcher. She was supposed to be entirely in control. Instead, she was sitting in a dimly lit, aggressively sterile room in Diagon Alley, waiting to sell her pride for an estate. She picked up the parchment again. She had drafted it 12 times. The first 11 drafts were too emotional, too pleading. The 12th was cold, hard, legal fact. She was buying a husband. Her grandmother, Euphemia, had been a stubborn, traditional witch. She believed a woman without a ring was a woman without direction. She had locked away the family vault, the countryside estate, and the sprawling gardens behind an archaic iron-clad clause. Inherit the estate and the funding, but only if engaged by her 25th birthday. Hermione hated it. But she needed the sanctuary. She needed the heavy, ancient wards of the estate for the lycanthrope project. She had spent 2 years lobbying the ministry, fighting through red tape, only to have her funding slashed by a vindictive department head. The independent donors backed out. The estate was the only way. She just had to survive a 6-month engagement to a man who used to despise her. A man who was currently broke, desperate, and completely out of options. It was perfect. It was terrible. And she needed him to say yes. The heavy oak door opened. Draco Malfoy walked in. He brought the cold air of the street with him. He didn't look like a man whose family was on the brink of complete legal and financial ruin. He looked like he owned the building. Impeccably tailored black suit. Silver tie. Shoulders back. But Hermione's eyes caught his cuffs as he reached to close the door. Slightly frayed at the very edges. The smallest crack in the armor. He turned. He met her gaze. Granger. His voice was slow. Deliberate. Weaponized politeness. Malfoy, she said. Her voice was too fast. She forced it slower. You're exactly on time. I was told time is money. He walked to the chair opposite hers. He didn't sit immediately. He studied the perfectly aligned quills. A microscopic twitch hit the corner of his mouth. He sat down. I read the proposal you held, he said. And? It's absurd. It's a business transaction, Hermione said. She pulled the heavy parchment toward her. You need a massive, immediate influx of cash for the Malfoy Legal Defense Fund. The ministry is going to seize the manor by the end of the month if you don't pay the fines. He didn't flinch. His face gave away nothing. Your mother will lose her ancestral gardens, Hermione pressed. The ministry is petty. They'll salt the earth just to prove a point. Draco's jaw tightened. Just a fraction, but it was there. Leave my mother out of this. He said, I can't. She's the primary reason you're going to agree to this. You'd let yourself rot in Azkaban out of sheer stubbornness, but you won't let her lose her home. He didn't confirm or deny. He didn't have to. And the alternative? Draco asked softly. I become a Granger? A fake Granger. A horrifying prospect. The feeling is mutual. And you need a convincing engagement to satisfy the estate lawyers, he said smoothly. 6 months. Purely professional. Yes. Draco leaned back. He crossed his long legs. He appeared entirely too calm. You want me to pretend to tolerate you for 6 months. I want you to pretend to be in love with me for 6 months. He let the silence hang. It was heavy. It was suffocating. The payout is substantial. He finally said, "It will cover the entire ministry fine," Hermione said, "and leave enough to keep the manor running for a year." He didn't blink. He didn't show how much he needed it. But he was here. "Let's see the contract," he said. Hermione slid the parchment across the desk. He took his time. He read the first page. Then he went back to the top and read it again. 6 months, he noted. 6 months is the minimum duration the estate lawyers will accept for a serious commitment. And how exactly do we end it? Hermione blinked. What? The exit strategy, Granger. We cannot simply wake up on month 7 and announce we are suddenly repulsed by each other. The lawyers would retroactively nullify the inheritance. We'll say we grew apart. Too cliché. We'll stage a massive public fight. I do not cause scenes in public, Draco said, looking offended. You got into a screaming match with Harry in the middle of Flourish and Blots just last year. That was a measured debate regarding the merits of defensive magic. I was perfectly calm. Fine. You'll catch me working too much. You'll claim I married my career. You'll leave me. I'll be the villain. He considered this. Acceptable. It tracks with public opinion. He turned to the second page. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked loudly. Hermione's leg bounced under the table. She forced it to stop. She aligned the inkwell. She tapped her thumb against her index finger. Clause 2, Draco said. His finger traced the parchment. The cover story. It says here we reconnected over a shared interest in rare potions ingredients. It's plausible, she said rapidly. You excel at potions. I excel at everything. It makes sense we would run into each other at an apothecary. It makes us sound like boring academics, he drawled. The press won't buy it. We need something better. Fine. We bumped into each other in a coffee shop. You spilled Americano on my coat. I yelled at you. You were charmed. Draco went completely still. I do not drink Americanos, Granger. It's a hypothetical. Put it down as a chance meeting at a ministry function. He said, tapping the desk. I was bored. You were lecturing someone about elf rights. I found it amusing. We argued. It escalated. She opened her mouth to argue. Then she closed it. It sounded exactly like something they would do. Fine, she said. She grabbed a quill and made the note in the margin. Clause 4, Draco continued. Public appearances. It states we must attend a minimum of 2 ministry functions a month. To establish the narrative, she said. The lawyers need to see a pattern of behavior. It also says... Draco read, his voice dropping into a dry register, that we must engage in believable displays of affection. Yes. Define believable. Hand-holding, Hermione said. Her face felt hot. Standing close. The standard things. Granger, if I hold your hand any tighter, the Daily Prophet will report we're attempting a biological merge. Just act like you don't despise the concept of human contact. She snapped. He raised his head. His grey eyes were sharp. I don't despise it. I simply prefer to deploy it strategically. Well, deploy it at the gala on Friday. He hummed. He focused on the contract. The rain beat against the glass. Hermione watched him read. She watched the way his eyes tracked the words. He was taking this seriously. He wasn't mocking her. It made her stomach twist. She was used to Malfoy the antagonist. Malfoy the business partner was entirely new territory. Clause 7, he said. What's wrong with Clause 7? It lacks specificity. He picked up one of her perfectly aligned quills. He didn't dip it in ink yet. If I am to be your adoring fiancé, I need rules of engagement. I won't have you claiming breach of contract because I didn't look sufficiently love-struck. I wouldn't do that. You are a terrifyingly literal person, Granger. We will put it in writing. He spun the quill between his fingers. I require a minimum of 3 compliments per public outing, Malfoy. She said, her chin lifting. He stopped spinning the quill. His gaze caught hers. Really held it. 3. Yes. I will try to find 3 tolerable things about your hair. My hair is fine. It's a hazard. It's efficient. It's attempting to escape its confines as we speak. She reached up, self-consciously tucking a stray curl behind her ear. He watched the movement. 2. He said, you get 2 compliments. 3. Or the payout drops by 10%. You are a menace, Granger. I'm a project manager. Put it in the contract. The banter was familiar. It was the old rhythm from school, stripped of the actual venom, leaving only the sharp edges. It was easier than being polite. And you, Draco said, must refrain from correcting my pronunciation of French wines in front of the estate lawyers. You pronounce terroir like a barbarian. Put it in the contract, Granger. She grabbed the second quill. She scribbled the addendum. What about the ring? He asked. Hermione paused. She hadn't thought about a ring. I can buy a simple band, she said. We can expense it from the initial payout. Draco scoffed. The sound was quiet but deeply condescending. You will not buy your own engagement ring, he said. Why not? Because you are marrying a Malfoy. Even a disgraced one. I wasn't going to buy cubic zirconia. You were going to buy something practical. Which is worse? He reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small, black velvet box. He set it on the desk. He didn't push it toward her. Hermione looked at the box. Open it, he said. She reached out. Her fingers were trembling again. She hated it. She flipped the lid open. The ring was silver. A single, clear diamond, surrounded by tiny emeralds. It was old. It was heavy. It was beautiful. It was my great-aunt's. Draco said quietly. His voice lost the drawl. She was disowned for marrying a French duelist. It's the only family heirloom the ministry didn't seize. Hermione looked down at the ring. The atmosphere suddenly felt very thin. "Malfoy," she whispered. "I can't take this. It's real. The engagement has to look real. But this is your family. Your actual family." He broke the silence. He turned his attention to the window. "Just wear the ring, Granger. Don't make a thing out of it." She didn't know what to say. She carefully took the ring from the box. She slid it onto her left hand. It fit perfectly. The metal was cold against her skin. She examined her hand. It didn't look like her hand anymore. It looked like the hand of a woman who was marrying Draco Malfoy. Draco watched her carefully. His focus dropped to her hand. Something shifted in his face. Just for a second. The cold mask slipped, and he seemed entirely exhausted. Then the mask snapped back into place. "Right," he said briskly. "Are there any other absurd demands?" "No." She cleared her throat. She picked up her quill. "This will do." "Sign it." Hermione signed her name at the bottom of the parchment. Her signature was sharp and neat. She slid the contract across the desk. Draco took the quill. He signed below her. His signature was sweeping and elegant. The magical contract sealed. The parchment flashed with a bright, warm gold light. The magic sank into the desk, up through her fingertips, binding them to the terms. A faint golden thread wrapped around her ring finger, then faded into the skin. It was done. 6 months. Draco stood up. He buttoned his jacket. The atmosphere shifted. Heavier. Charged. He focused on her face. His eyes were unreadable. The grey was flat and calm. "Well, fiancé," he said. "Let's go convince the world." Part to the atrium of the Ministry of Magic was loud. Draco stood in the shadow of a marble pillar, away from the flashing bulbs of the press photographers. He adjusted his cuffs. Left, then right. He pulled the sleeves of his jacket down, just enough to cover the slight fraying at the edges of the silk. He hated garlers. He hated the ministry. Mostly, he hated the way people looked at him now. It wasn't the open hostility of the post-war trials anymore. It was worse. It was pity mixed with morbid curiosity. The disgraced heir. The bankrupt aristocrat. The manor was a tomb these days. Cold, empty, seized of most of its artifacts by overzealous ministry auditors. His mother spent her days in the rose garden, pretending the protective wards weren't failing. The ministry fines were meant to be punitive. They were meant to ruin the Malfoy family entirely. He checked his silver pocket watch. Granger was late. He snapped the watch closed. If she backed out now, the manor was gone. His mother would be evicted by Tuesday. Looking for an exit strategy, Malfoy. Draco did not jump. He turned his head slowly. Theonot was leaning against the adjacent pillar. He held a glass of champagne. He looked entirely unbothered by the sheer volume of society elite swarming the room. "I'm waiting for my fiancé, Theo," Draco said. Theo smiled. It was a lazy, knowing thing. "Right. The fiancé." Theo took a sip of champagne. "I read the announcement in the Prophet this morning. I must admit, I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my toast. It's a serious commitment. Draco deadpanned. It's a spectacular lie, Theo corrected cheerfully. And a very expensive one, I imagine. How much is she paying you? That is strictly confidential. Fascinating. Theo's eyes tracked something over Draco's shoulder. Well, you might want to start earning your galleons. The employer has arrived. Draco turned. Hermione Granger was walking up the sweeping marble staircase. She looked entirely stressed. She was carrying a small velvet clutch like it was a weapon. She was scanning the room with the frantic energy of a researcher looking for a missing citation. And she looked stunning. It was annoying. She was supposed to look like the swotty, chaotic disaster he remembered from school. Instead, she was wearing a deep emerald green dress that fell in soft, heavy folds to the floor. Her hair wasn't pulled back into its usual severe bun. It was loose, falling around her shoulders in controlled chaos. Draco forced his breathing to remain completely even. He stepped out of the shadows. He walked toward her. She spotted him. She stopped moving. "You're late, Granger," he said as he reached her. "I was coordinating the sanctuary budget," she replied rapidly. She took in his suit. "You look expensive," he supplied. "I was going to say tolerable." "I'll take it." He offered her his arm. Clause 4, Section 2. Believable displays of affection begin now. Hermione looked at his arm like it was cursed. "Right." She breathed. She slid her hand into the crook of his elbow. The physical contact was jarring. Draco's spine stiffened. She was warm. She was solid. She smelled like old paper and vanilla. "Try not to look like you're being led to the executioner's block," he murmured. "I'm trying," she whispered back. "There are a lot of cameras. Look at me, then. Not them." She turned her head. She met his gaze. Her brown eyes were wide and slightly panicked. "Walk," he instructed quietly. They walked into the main hall. The effect was immediate. The ambient noise of the garler dropped by a noticeable decibel. Heads turned. Whispers started. A flashbulb went off to their left. Then 3 more to their right. Draco felt Hermione's fingers dig into his jacket sleeve. "Breathe, Granger," he muttered, keeping his face perfectly neutral. "You're cutting off my circulation." "Sorry." She loosened her grip slightly. They navigated the edge of the dance floor. People parted for them like the Red Sea. "I owe you 3 compliments," she reminded him, her voice tight. "Don't strain yourself, Granger. The night is young. Your suit is well tailored." She said stiffly, "That's a compliment to my tailor, not me. Try again." "You are surprisingly punctual." "That is a basic professional courtesy." "Are you really this bad at this?" "I don't spend my time practicing flattery." "Clearly. You have 1 left. Make it count." She looked at him. She looked at the silver tie, the sharp line of his jaw, the grey eyes watching her with quiet amusement. "You." She started, then stopped. "You didn't laugh at me when I tripped on the stairs outside." His amusement faded slightly. "I'm not a monster, Granger." "We need to find the estate lawyers," Hermione said softly, changing the subject. They sent a representative tonight to observe us. A Mr. Bletchley. Marcus Bletchley's father? Yes. Draco suppressed a sigh. Excellent. A man with the investigative tact of a bludger. We just need to convince him. Theo materialized beside them again. He fell into step on Draco's left. You two look absolutely miserable, Theo observed. It's highly entertaining. Go away, Theo, Draco said. I can't. I'm fascinated. Theo looked at Hermione's left hand. Granger. The ring is a nice touch. Very heavy. Very pureblood. Don't tell me that's the Black family diamond. Your mother let you give that to Hermione Granger? My mother is pragmatic. Draco said. Your mother is terrifying, Theo countered. But I respect the commitment to the bit. Theo stopped walking. Incoming. 2 o'clock. The wolves have spotted the wounded. Draco tracked Theo's gaze. Mr. Bletchley was approaching. He was a tall, severe man with a clipboard and a permanently suspicious squint. Showtime, Draco murmured. He turned slightly. He smoothly extracted his arm from Hermione's grip, and before she could protest, he slid his hand around to the small of her back. He rested his palm firmly against the green silk at her waist. Hermione flinched. Her whole body went rigid. Relax, he breathed in her ear. It's a lot of contact, she whispered back. It's a garler. Couples touch. Mr. Bletchley reached them. He did not smile. Miss Granger, Bletchley said. Anne. Mr. Malfoy. Mr. Bletchley. Hermione answered. Her voice was an octave higher than usual. A pleasure. I must admit, Miss Granger, the estate trustees were surprised by your sudden announcement. Bletchley said. His eyes flicked down to Draco's hand on her waist. Very surprised. Given your history. History is just a record of mistakes, Bletchley. Draco said smoothly. His thumb moved, just a fraction of an inch, stroking the silk of her dress. He felt Hermione shudder. We prefer to focus on the present. Indeed. Bletchley narrowed his eyes. And how exactly did this present come about? The timeline seems rather convenient. Right before your 25th birthday, Miss Granger. It wasn't planned, Hermione blurted out. Draco squeezed her waist gently. A silent warning. Let me. It was at a ministry function. Draco said. His voice was a low, intimate drawl. He angled his body toward Hermione, making it look as though they were sharing a private joke. 3 months ago. I was entirely bored. She was lecturing a minor department head about elf rights in the corner. Hermione looked up at him. She was actually surprised. He was using the cover story they drafted, but he was making it sound terrifyingly real. I found it amusing, Draco continued, his attention locked on Hermione's face. I intervened. We argued. It escalated. Escalated? Bletchley asked, his pen hovering over his clipboard. She told me I was an arrogant aristocrat with no concept of systemic inequality, Draco said, offering a faint, self-deprecating smile. I told her she was a menace to peaceful society. Hermione's breath hitched. That wasn't in the contract. And then? Bletchley prompted, leaning in slightly. And then, Draco said softly, I realized I didn't want to argue with anyone else. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Theo, who was still standing a few feet away, went perfectly still. Hermione looked up at Draco in silence. Her mind went entirely blank. She had 1,000 responses prepared for legal inquiries, but none for the way he was looking at her right now. It was soft. It was focused. It looked exactly like love. You're remarkably good at lying, Malfoy, she whispered, her voice barely carrying over the music. It's a family trait. He murmured back. Try to look a bit more besotted, Granger, you're ruining my performance. Bletchley cleared his throat. He looked slightly uncomfortable, as though he had intruded on something genuinely private. Well, Bletchley said, putting his pen away. I suppose that satisfies the initial inquiry. We will, of course, require regular updates. Of course. Hermione said faintly. Bletchley nodded stiffly and walked away, melting back into the crowd. Theo stepped forward. He looked at Draco's hand, which was still firmly planted on Hermione's waist. Fascinating. Theo said quietly. You usually charge galleons for this level of dedication, mate. Draco didn't reply. He watched Bletchley disappear into the sea of robes. The adrenaline of the performance slowly began to fade. The immediate threat was gone. The contract was safe for another week. He bought it. Hermione exhaled. Her shoulders dropped. The rigid tension left her frame. She leaned back, just a fraction, into the support of Draco's hand. Draco froze. He felt the exact weight of her against his palm. The warmth radiated through the thin silk. The lawyer was gone. The performance was over. He still didn't let go. Yes. Draco murmured. His voice sounded strange to his own ears. He bought it. They stood there for another 10 seconds. Then 20. The music swelled around them. The flashbulbs popped in the distance. Finally, Draco dropped his hand. The absence of her warmth was immediate. The chill of the atrium rushed in to fill the space between them. He took a half step back. We should make a circuit of the room, Draco said cleanly. Fulfill clause for completely. Then we leave. Right, Hermione said. She didn't look at him. She smoothed the front of her dress. They completed the circuit. They drank terrible champagne. Hermione delivered her final mandatory compliment in a voice so stiff it sounded like she was reading a weather report. Draco accepted it with a mocking bow. It was exactly what they had agreed upon. A business transaction. An hour later, they left the ministry. The carriage ride back to her flat was entirely silent. Hermione looked out the window at the passing streetlights. Draco sat on the opposite bench, his long legs stretched out, his arms crossed over his chest. She was taking her hair out of the pins that had secured the loose style. She appeared tired. The fierce energy that had sustained her through the gala was completely gone. You performed adequately today, Granger, he said quietly. She glanced over at him. Adequately? You only stepped on my foot twice during the circuit. You stopped abruptly. I was avoiding Parkinson. You should be thanking me. Thank you for saving me from Pansy Parkinson, she said dryly. You're welcome. He didn't say another word. He didn't mock her. He didn't start a fight. He just sat there, listening to the rhythm of the horse's hooves on the cobblestones. And despite the damp chill of the London night seeping through the carriage windows, the palm of his right hand, the one that had rested on her waist, still felt entirely too warm. 2 weeks later, Hermione's flat was not designed for Draco Malfoy. The ceilings were too low. The bookshelves were overflowing, creating structural hazards in the corners. The sofa was a battered, second-hand monstrosity covered in violently floral fabric. Draco was currently sitting on it. He looked like a purely bred racing Kneazle that had accidentally been locked in a second-hand bookshop. Hermione ignored him. She aggressively tapped a stack of parchment against the edge of the coffee table. The edges aligned perfectly. She set the stack down. She picked up the next stack. Tap, tap, tap. If you hit that parchment any harder, Granger, you're going to break the table, Draco said. His voice came from over the rim of a steaming mug. The table is reinforced, Hermione said rapidly. She tapped the next stack. It has to be. Do you know how many precedent files Bletchley sent over? 52. 52 precedent files regarding the legal definition of cohabitation. Fascinating. It's not fascinating, Malfoy, it's a nightmare. She set the second stack down precisely 1 inch from the first. If we don't have the timeline perfectly synchronized for the handover meeting tomorrow, Bletchley will flag the entire engagement as fraudulent. We will synchronize it. You haven't even looked at the schedule. I have looked at it. You have color-coded it. It is burned into my retinas. Hermione stopped tapping. She looked at him. He was wearing a black jumper. It was the first time in 2 weeks she had seen him in something other than a suit. It made him look less like a hostile negotiator and far too much like a person. It was deeply distracting. She forced her eyes back to the papers. We need to go over the December timeline again, she said, her voice tight. When the lawyers ask where we spent Christmas, we spent it in Paris, Draco interrupted smoothly. My mother has a small flat in the Marais. We went to avoid the press. You found the magical archives in the fourth arrondissement fascinating. I found the wine tolerable. Hermione blinked. That actually sounds perfect. I am aware. But what if they ask for details? What if they ask about the flight, or the port key, or... Granger, Draco said patiently. You are manufacturing crises. If they ask about the port key, we took the 9 a.m. authorized ministry line. We stayed for 4 days. It snowed on the 3rd. It snowed. It always snows in my fictional Parisian holidays. It adds to the romance. She glared at him. This isn't a joke. I am entirely serious. You need to relax. She reached for another stack of papers. Her fingers were shaking slightly. She didn't know why she was so on edge tonight. Actually, she knew exactly why. It had been 2 weeks since the gala. 2 weeks since he had placed his hand on her waist and lied with such absolute, terrifying sincerity that she had almost believed it herself. They had attended 3 more public functions since then. At every single one, he had been the perfect, protective, devoted fiancé. He always stood between her and the worst of the photographers. He always remembered the 3 mandatory compliments. He never pushed her boundaries. It was exhausting. It was exhausting waiting for the other shoe to drop. It was exhausting pretending that the warmth of his hand through her clothes didn't linger for hours afterward. "We still need to memorize the guest list for the charity auction next week," she pressed, pulling out a new scroll. "I already know the guest list. I went to school with half of them. The other half have been trying to buy my family's seized assets for a month. You still need to know how to interact with my colleagues. I am perfectly capable of interacting with your colleagues without starting a duel. You insulted Terry Boot yesterday." Boot asked if the Malfoy fortune was truly gone or just hidden in offshore goblin accounts. My response was measured. You told him he had the deductive reasoning of a flobberworm. Which is why it was measured. I could have said worse. You can't insult people we are trying to charm, Malfoy. He isn't charming. He's a parasite. And I will not have him talking to my fiancé like she's a pawn in some ministry game. The word fiancé hung in the air. He had said it so naturally. Not as a joke. Not as a contractual term. Just a statement of fact. Hermione swallowed hard. "You're doing it again," Draco observed quietly. Hermione paused, her hand hovering over a loose piece of parchment. "Doing what?" "Organizing things." He took a slow sip from his mug. "You only aggressively align your stationery when you're panicked. I'm not panicked. You just arranged those quills by feather length." Hermione snatched her hand back from the quills. Her face felt hot. "I am simply trying to ensure we don't end up in Azkaban for contract fraud." She snapped. Draco didn't rise to the bait. He set his mug down on the violently floral coffee table. He stood up. Hermione's breath caught in her throat. The flat was too small. When he stood, he took up all the available oxygen. He didn't walk toward the door. He walked into her tiny, cramped kitchen. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice an octave higher than she wanted it to be. "Boiling water," Draco said. His back was to her. He was navigating the narrow space between the sink and the stove with surprising grace. "You don't know how to use a muggle stove." "I am a grown man, Granger. I can deduce the function of a knob." A small blue flame flickered to life under the kettle. Hermione stared at it. "Why are you boiling water?" "Because you have been vibrating at a frequency that suggests impending cardiac arrest for the last hour," Draco said over his shoulder. "And because you haven't stopped talking long enough to make yourself a drink." He was making her tea. Draco Malfoy was standing in her muggle kitchen, in a black jumper, making her tea. The absurdity of the situation hit her like a physical blow. She sat down heavily on the edge of the armchair opposite the sofa. She watched him. He found the mugs in the cabinet on the first try. He found the tea tins. He didn't ask her where anything was. The kettle whistled. He poured the water. He let it steep. A minute later, he walked back into the sitting room. He held a blue ceramic mug out to her. Hermione took it cautiously. Their fingers didn't brush, but the heat from the ceramic radiated into her palms. She looked down at the liquid before taking a cautious sip. Her breath hitched in her throat. It was Earl Grey, with a splash of milk, and exactly 1 sugar. Hermione lowered the mug slowly. She looked up at him. He had already sat back down on the floral sofa and picked up a precedent file. "Malfoy," she said quietly. "Yes?" He didn't look up from the file. How did you know how I take my tea? The silence in the room suddenly felt very thick. The ambient noise of the London traffic outside her window seemed to fade away. Draco turned a page in the file. The crisp sound of the parchment was incredibly loud. I have eyes, Granger, he said. His tone was perfectly flat. We haven't had tea together since the day we signed the contract in the law office, she said, her logical brain latching onto the facts. And I didn't have milk or sugar that day. The lawyers only had black tea. Draco didn't say anything. So how did you know? She pressed. He finally looked up. His grey eyes were entirely unreadable. The mask was perfectly in place. During the Department of Mysteries trial, he said slowly. 3 years ago. We were sequestered in the waiting room for 6 hours. You drank 4 cups of tea from the ministry cart. Earl Grey. Splash of milk. 1 sugar. Hermione looked at him. 3 years ago. A day he had been on trial for his life. A day he was supposedly terrified and fighting for his family's survival. And he had noticed exactly how she took her tea. You noticed that, she whispered. Observation is a survival skill. He said smoothly. He looked back down at the file. Do not read anything else into it. But she was already reading into it. She was reading the entire encyclopedia of it. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. She took another sip of the tea. It tasted like a terrifying revelation. Right, she managed to say. Her voice was shaky. The timeline. Yes. The timeline. She leaned forward to grab the master schedule off the coffee table. At the exact same moment, Draco reached across the table to grab the same piece of parchment. Hermione's fingers closed around the edge of the paper. Draco's hand came down directly over hers. They both went entirely still. The banter died instantly. The air in the small flat vanished. Hermione's eyes snapped up to his face. He was leaning forward, suspended halfway across the table. His face was inches from hers. He didn't pull his hand away. His palm was covering the back of her hand. His long fingers were curled slightly, resting against her knuckles. The skin-on-skin contact was electric. It sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated heat straight up her arm. He smelled like bergamot and something dark and expensive. She couldn't breathe. She didn't want to breathe. Draco's eyes dropped from hers to her mouth. It was a tiny movement. A fraction of a second. But she saw it. She saw the absolute, focused intensity of his gaze land on her lips. Her own lips parted on an inhale she couldn't control. The silence stretched. It pulled tight, like a wire about to snap. Their professional business transaction was gone. The contract was gone. There was only the heavy, suffocating weight of him sitting inches away, his hand burning against hers. She wanted him to lean in. The realization hit her with the force of a bludger. She wanted him to lean across the remaining 3 inches and kiss her. Draco's chest rose in a sharp, sudden inhale. The wire snapped. He pulled his hand back as if he had been burned. He stood up. The movement was fast. Violent. Completely devoid of his usual elegant grace. Hermione jolted backward in her chair, her heart pounding frantically against her ribs. We're done for the night, Draco said. His voice was harsh. The dry drawl was entirely gone. But the timeline, she stammered, her hands gripping the edge of the armchair. The timeline is fine. The cover story is fine. Everything is fine. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the door. He grabbed his coat from the back of the sofa. Malfoy, I will see you at the handover meeting tomorrow at noon, Granger. He didn't wait for her to answer. He didn't look back. He walked to the door. He opened it. The door clicked shut behind him. The silence in the flat was absolute. It was deafening. Hermione sat perfectly still in the armchair. The master schedule was still sitting on the table, exactly where they had both reached for it. She slowly raised her hand, the hand he had touched, and wrapped her fingers around the blue ceramic mug. The tea was still warm against her skin. She touched the rim of the teacup and closed her eyes. A spike of pure, unadulterated panic shot through her chest. She didn't want him to be fake anymore. The estate weekend. Draco stood in the center of the master bedroom and looked at the bed. It was a massive, archaic four-poster structure carved from dark mahogany, draped in heavy emerald velvet hangings. It looked like it belonged in a museum. Or a tomb. More importantly, it was the only piece of furniture in the room designed for sleeping. He closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose. I am not acknowledging this, he said out loud to the empty room. It is a cheap, predictable narrative contrivance, and I refuse to participate. The universe, as usual, ignored him. The estate in the Yorkshire countryside was sprawling, ancient, and falling apart. Euphemia Granger had apparently spent the last decade of her life warding off the ministry rather than maintaining the roof. When the estate lawyers mandated a weekend cohabitation inspection to verify the engagement, Hermione had failed to mention that the north, south, and east wings were entirely sealed by failing blood magic. The master bedroom in the west wing was the only habitable room left, with one bed. The fireplace behind him crackled suddenly. Green flames flared, throwing emerald light against the stone walls. Draco didn't turn around. He didn't have to. Are you brooding, mate? A voice drawled from the hearth. Draco dropped his hand and turned slowly. Theonot's head was floating in the green flames, looking entirely too cheerful for 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning. I am assessing the structural integrity of the ceiling, Theo. You're glaring at a bed with an expression of deep existential terror, Theo corrected. It's quite the picture. I assume the rest of the house is a ruin? It's a fixer-upper, Draco said dryly. If by fixer-upper you mean it requires an entire team of cursebreakers and a small fortune in restorative potions. And only one bed. Do not. Theo's laugh echoed off the stone walls. I'm just checking if the fake relationship has progressed to real pining yet. Theo squinted, studying Draco's face in the firelight. I see by your face it has. There is no pining, Draco said, his voice dropping into a dangerously quiet register. It is a business transaction. We are maintaining the illusion for the lawyers. Draco, Theo said gently. The amusement faded, replaced by something uncomfortably perceptive. You haven't slept in a week. Your mother told me you've been pacing the library every night since you came back from Granger's flat on Tuesday. Whatever happened over there, nothing happened. Right. And the sudden, aggressive avoidance is just part of the cover story. Theo sighed. You're paying for this, you know. Not in galleons. It's going to cost you. The contract ends in 4 months, Draco said rigidly. Then I take my payout, save the manor, and we never have to speak again. It is clean. It is simple. It's a spectacular disaster waiting to happen, Theo said cheerfully, the lazy smile returning. I wouldn't miss it for the world. Try not to spontaneously combust before Monday. The green flames vanished. Draco exhaled slowly. He ran a hand through his hair, destroying that was losing his grip, and he had known at the moment his hand closed over hers in the flat on Tuesday night. He had felt the jolt of pure magic, the terrifying slide of his own control shattering. He had wanted to cross the 3 inches between them and kiss her until she forgot the contract, the lawyers, and every reason she had to hate him. Instead of crossing the distance, he had fled. He was a Malfoy ruined, disgraced, and bankrupt. Hermione Granger was the brightest witch of their age, trying to build a sanctuary for outcasts. He was the anchor that would drag her down. He had rules. Rule 1. Do not touch her unless contractual obligated. Rule 2. Remember it isn't real. The door to the bedroom creaked open. Hermione walked in. She was carrying a clipboard and 3 rolls of parchment. She looked exhausted, her hair pulled into a severe, messy bun that was already shedding curls. The air in the room instantly felt thinner. Draco crossed his arms over his chest, forcing his spine into a rigid line. The lawyers are arriving tomorrow at noon. Hermione said rapidly, not looking at him. She was focused on the clipboard. We need to clear the dust in the main hall, reinforce the wards on the front gate, and establish a narrative for why we haven't repaired the east wing. We haven't repaired it because we are waiting on a specialized cursebreaker from Paris, Draco lied smoothly. Hermione finally looked up. Her brown eyes were wide and slightly shadowed. That's good. Write that down. She walked further into the room. Then she saw the bed. She stopped dead. Her eyes darted from the massive 4-poster to the empty corners of the room, then back to the bed. Where is the other bed? She asked. Her voice was slightly higher than usual. There is no other bed, Granger. The rest of the house is sealed. I can conjure a cot. The ambient magic in this house is incredibly unstable. If you try to conjure a cot, you'll likely summon a colony of doxes or blow a hole in the floor. Hermione gazed at the bed. She swallowed hard. I'll sleep in the chair. You will not sleep in the chair. Draco snapped. He regretted the sharpness immediately, but he couldn't take it back. If Bletchley arrives early and finds us sleeping in separate corners of the room like hostile hostages, the inheritance is gone. I am not a hostage, she said defensively. Then act like a fiancé, he said, turning away from her to look out the heavy glass window. It's a king-sized mattress. Keep to your side, and I'll keep to mine. The silence stretched behind him. He could hear her breathing. He could hear the frantic scratching of her quill on the clipboard as she desperately looked for something to organize. Right, she finally said. Fine. The front gate. We need to fix the wards. They spent the afternoon avoiding each other. It was a complex, exhausting dance. Hermione tackled the cleaning charms in the main hall with the ferocity of a warrior going into battle. Draco went out to the front gate. The iron was old and heavy, humming with residual magic. The protective wards were decaying, the spellwork unspooling like old thread. Draco took off his jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and went to work. Magic, for Draco, had always been about precision. He didn't use a wand for the delicate work. He placed his bare hands against the freezing iron, tracing the ancient runic carved into the metal, feeding his own magic into the gaps. It was exhausting work. It required absolute focus. He didn't realize she was watching him until the ward snapped into place with a sharp, ozone crack. Draco dropped his hands, breathing heavily. He turned around. Hermione was standing on the stone path a few yards away. She was holding a rag and a bottle of polish, but her hands were entirely still. She was looking at his forearms. He had rolled his sleeves up past the dark mark. Draco went perfectly still. The instinct to hide, to cover the brand, surged up in his throat, bitter and sharp. He reached for his sleeve. "Don't," Hermione said quietly. Draco stopped. She walked closer. She didn't look at the sky or the gate. She kept her eyes on him. "That was incredibly complex spellwork," she said. Her voice was entirely professional, but there was a strange, tight quality to it. "You didn't use an incantation. The old magic responds better to intent," he said. His voice sounded rough. "You're very good at it." "I had a lot of time to study warding in the manor," he said, leaving the while under-house arrest unsaid. Hermione nodded slowly. She finally looked down at his left arm. She didn't flinch. She didn't look away in disgust. She looked at it the way she looked at everything, with analytical intensity, trying to understand it. "It's faded." She noted softly. "It will never fade completely." "No. Scars rarely do." She met his eyes. The tension from Tuesday night was suddenly back, roaring in the space between them. It wasn't the frantic, panicked heat of the flat. It was something heavier, deeper. Draco stepped back. He broke the eye contact. He pulled his sleeve down, snapping the cuff closed. "The gate is secure," he said coldly. "Bletchley won't be able to breach it without an invitation." He walked past her, heading back toward the house. He didn't look back to see if she was following. By 6 o'clock, the sky over Yorkshire bruised into a violent, churning purple. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in a matter of minutes. The wind picked up, howling around the stone turrets of the estate. They were in the small, dusty library on the ground floor, reviewing the timeline for the 4th time. He's going to ask about the caterers for the wedding, Hermione said, her finger tracing a line on the parchment. "We need to agree on a venue." Thunder cracked directly overhead. It was a deafening, physical sound that rattled the floorboards. Simultaneously, the magical lighting in the chandelier above them flickered, flared blindingly bright, and died. The room plunged into absolute, pitch-black darkness. Draco heard a sharp, panicked intake of breath from across the table. "Granger?" he said. She didn't answer. He heard the scrape of a chair being pushed back violently. Then a heavy thud, like someone backing into a bookshelf. "Hermione." He dropped the surname. He stood up, his hands feeling for the edge of the table. "Where is your wand?" "I left it upstairs." She gasped. Her voice was high, tight, and completely devoid of oxygen. "Stay still. I'll cast a Lumos." Draco reached into his pocket. His fingers closed around the hawthorn wood. He pulled it out. "Lumos," he commanded. Nothing happened. Draco frowned. He poured more magic into the core. "Lumos Maximer." A pathetic, weak spark spit from the end of the wand and immediately died. The ambient magic of the estate. The storm had disrupted the ley lines. The wards were sucking all available magical energy to keep the roof intact, leaving nothing for basic spellwork inside the house. Malfoy. Hermione choked out. Draco dropped his wand on the table. He moved around the edge of the wood, navigating blindly by memory. He found her backed into the corner between the bookshelf and the heavy velvet curtains. She was curled in on herself, her knees pulled to her chest, her hands clamped over her ears. She was panting in sheer panic. It wasn't just the dark. Draco knew what trauma looked like. He knew what a panic attack sounded like. The sudden, absolute darkness, the oppressive weight of failing magic. It was Malfoy Manor all over again. It was the drawing room. He dropped to his knees in front of her and threw Rule 1 out the window. Reaching out in the dark, his hands found her shoulders. She flinched violently at the contact, trying to pull away. "Hermione, it's me," Draco said. His voice was low, steady, and entirely stripped of the drawl. "It's just me." She was shaking. Fine, rapid tremors were racking her entire frame. She couldn't draw a full breath. "It's dark," she gasped, her hands digging into her own arms. "I can't see. I can't, I know." Draco murmured. He slid his hands down her arms, catching her wrists. He pulled her hands away from her skin gently but firmly. "I'm right here. You're safe." He didn't think about the contract. He didn't think about the lawyers. He pulled her forward, off the bookshelf, and straight into his chest. Hermione collapsed against him. She buried her face in the shoulder of his jumper, her fingers gripping the fabric of his shirt like a lifeline. Draco wrapped his arms around her tightly. He rested his chin on the top of her head. He let his own body weight anchor her to the floor. "Breathe, Hermione," he said quietly into her hair. "Match my breathing. In." He took a slow, exaggerated breath. Out. She tried, but it came out as a broken sob. The sound cracked something fundamental inside Draco's chest. "You're in Yorkshire," he murmured, his hand coming up to press against the back of her head, holding her close. "You're in your grandmother's house. The wards are holding. I fixed the gate. Nothing is getting in." He kept talking. He didn't care what he was saying, as long as it kept the silence at bay. He talked about the architecture of the house. He talked about the ridiculousness of Bletchley's clipboard. He talked about the precise chemical composition of Earl Grey tea. Slowly, agonizingly, the shaking began to subside. Her breathing leveled out. The frantic, terrified grip she had on his shirt loosened, though she didn't let go. They sat on the floor of the dark library for a long time. The thunder rolled outside, but it sounded distant now. "I'm sorry," Hermione whispered against his chest. Her voice was hoarse. "Do not apologize for surviving a war, Granger," Draco said fiercely. She let out a shaky breath. She tilted her head up. He couldn't see her face in the pitch black, but he could feel the ghost of her breath against his jaw. "Your heart is beating really fast," she noted quietly. "I'm terrified of the dark," Draco deadpanned, his voice completely flat. Hermione let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. She didn't pull away. He didn't let her go. "We need to get upstairs," Draco said eventually, though he made no move to stand. "It's freezing down here, and the fire in the bedroom operates on an independent runic array. It should still be lit. I can't see the stairs. I know exactly where they are. He stood up first. He didn't let go of her hand. He pulled her up beside him, lacing his fingers through hers. Her hand was freezing. He led her through the dark, trusting his spatial memory and the faint drafts of the house. They navigated the hallway, the main staircase, and the long corridor of the west wing. He never let go of her hand. He kept his thumb rubbing small, soothing circles against her knuckles. They reached the bedroom. The fire was indeed lit, casting a warm, flickering orange glow across the massive bed. Hermione stopped in the doorway. She looked at the bed, then down at their joined hands. Draco let go. The loss of contact felt like a physical amputation. "Take the right side," he said roughly, turning away to strip off his jumper. "I'll take the left." They went through the agonizingly awkward process of getting ready for bed in tense silence. Hermione retreated to the attached washroom to change into a massive, oversized t-shirt. Draco stayed in his trousers and a thin white undershirt. When he finally climbed into the left side of the bed, Hermione was already on the extreme right edge, huddled under the heavy velvet quilt. The bed was enormous, but he could feel the cold radiating from the stone walls. The fire wasn't enough to heat the massive room. Draco lay on his back, eyes fixed on the canopy. He was rigidly still. He was excruciatingly aware of the space between them. "Malfoy?" Her voice was tiny in the dark room. "Yes, Granger. I'm freezing." Draco closed his eyes. Rule 1. Do not touch her unless contractual obligated. He threw the rulebook into the imaginary fire. He shifted across the mattress. He closed the gap. He reached out and pulled her backward, slotting her back against his chest. Hermione gasped softly, but she didn't pull away. She immediately curled into the warmth of his body. Draco pulled the heavy quilt up over both of them. He wrapped his arm around her waist, anchoring her to him. She was so small. She fit perfectly against him. "Better?" he murmured against her ear. "Yes," she breathed. Her hand came up and rested over his arm where it was wrapped around her waist. Her fingers laced through his. Draco didn't sleep. He lay awake for hours, listening to the storm rage outside, holding the witch he was supposed to be pretending to love. He didn't have to pretend anymore. When Draco woke up, the storm had passed. Pale, grey morning light was filtering through the heavy curtains, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. He was warm. He opened his eyes. Hermione was asleep. During the night, she had turned around. She was now facing him. Her head was tucked under his chin, her face pressed into his neck. One of her legs was tangled completely with his. Her arm was thrown over his chest, her hand resting flat against his heart. He was holding her with both arms, entirely wrapped around her in a desperate, protective hold. Draco didn't move. He barely dared to breathe. In sleep, the frantic, stressed tension was completely gone from her face. She looked young. She looked peaceful. Her messy curls were spread across the white pillowcase like spilled ink. The contract didn't matter. The estate lawyers didn't matter. The impending bankruptcy didn't matter. For the first time in his entire life, Draco Malfoy was exactly where he wanted to be. He slowly raised his right hand. He was terrified of waking her, but he couldn't stop himself. He gently brushed a stray curl away from her face. He traced the line of her jaw with the back of his knuckles. Her skin was incredibly soft. She sighed in her sleep and leaned into the touch. Draco looked at her. The realization crushed the last remaining fragments of his armor into dust. He was in love with her, and he had been for months. Maybe years. The fake engagement had just been an excuse to finally stand close enough to admit it. Dropping his hand, he let it rest gently against the side of her neck, feeling the steady, rhythmic pulse of her heartbeat. He looked up at the heavy velvet canopy of the bed. "I'm ruined," he whispered to the empty room. The contract ends the Diagon Alley law office of Bletchley and Vance was exactly as sterile as it had been 6 months ago. It was raining again. The heavy droplets hammered against the enchanted glass window, blurring the grey stones of the alley outside into a dreary, indistinct smudge. Hermione sat in the high-backed leather chair, her spine perfectly straight. She was not aggressively lining up the quills on the desk this time. She was keeping her hands folded neatly in her lap, fingers laced together so tightly her knuckles were white. If she let go, she knew her hands would shake. Draco sat in the chair next to her. He was close enough that she could smell the faint, familiar scent of cedar and expensive parchment, but there was an invisible, impenetrable wall between them. He hadn't touched her in 4 months. Not since the morning in Yorkshire, when they had woken up tangled together under a heavy velvet quilt. She had opened her eyes to find him looking at her with an expression so devastatingly unguarded it had stopped her heart. But before she could speak, before she could ask what it meant, the wards had chimed, announcing Bletchley's arrival. Draco had rebuilt his armor in the time it took to walk downstairs. He had retreated behind the drawl, the weaponized politeness, and the rigid adherence to the contract. The fake dates had continued. The public performances were flawless. But behind closed doors, he kept a measured, agonizing distance. He was protecting her, she realized eventually. He truly believed he was a sinking ship, and he refused to let her tie herself to the mast. "Everything appears to be in order," Bletchley said, his reedy voice cutting through the heavy silence of the office. He tapped his wand against a towering stack of parchment. The paperwork glowed briefly, signaling the magical verification. "The probationary period mandated by Euphemia Granger's will has been satisfied," Bletchley continued, adjusting his spectacles. "The estate, the grounds, and the associated liquid assets are hereby transferred in full to Hermione Jean Granger." Bletchley pushed a heavy, wax-sealed folder across the polished mahogany desk. Hermione didn't reach for it immediately. She looked at the folder. It was everything she had worked for. It was the sanctuary for displaced magical creatures, the research grant, the future she had envisioned since the war ended. It felt like a pile of ashes. "And from Mr. Malfoy," Bletchley said, sliding a thick Gringotts promissory note across the desk. "The agreed-upon compensation for services rendered during the transition period." Draco didn't hesitate. He reached out and picked up the heavy parchment. His cuff shifted slightly, revealing the pale, faded edge of the dark mark. Hermione's eyes tracked the movement automatically. With that piece of paper, the Malfoy estate was saved. The crippling legal debts would be cleared. He would be free. All that remains is the dissolution of the binding clause. Bletchley said, pulling a final, single sheet of parchment to the center of the desk. "If you would both sign on the bottom line. It has been a pleasure facilitating this deeply romantic union." The lawyer's tone was entirely dry. He knew exactly what this was. He just didn't care, as long as the Ministry's archaic laws were technically satisfied. Hermione picked up the black quill. Her hand was perfectly steady. She had practiced this moment in her head 1,000 times over the last month. She would not cry. She would not beg a Malfoy to stay. She had her pride, and she had her estate. She pressed the nib to the parchment and signed her name with sharp, precise strokes. She slid the paper toward Draco. He didn't look at her. He took the quill. He held it for a fraction of a second longer than necessary, his grip tight enough to snap the feather. Then he signed his elegant, looping signature next to hers. The moment the ink dried, the magic shifted. The golden thread that had bound them 6 months ago flared briefly in the air between them, illuminating the dust motes before shattering into a shower of cold sparks. The magic faded into the floorboards. It was gone. The contract was fulfilled. The engagement was over. Hermione felt an immediate, violently cold drop in her chest. The magical connection, the low, constant hum of his presence that had sat in the back of her mind for half a year was severed. The silence in her own head was deafening. "Congratulations to you both," Bletchley said, clapping his hands together once. "You are free to go." Draco stood up. He buttoned his suit jacket with sharp, efficient movements. "Thank you, Bletchley. I will take this directly to Gringotts." "Of course." Draco turned to Hermione. His grey eyes were entirely occluded. The silver was flat, giving absolutely nothing away. "Granger," he said, nodding once. "Malfoy," she replied. Her voice sounded thin, like it belonged to someone else. She gathered her folder. They walked out of the lore office together, navigating the narrow hallway in suffocating silence. The rain was coming down harder when they stepped out onto the cobblestones of Diagon Alley. The street was mostly empty, the usual afternoon crowd seeking shelter in the shops and pubs. They stood under the narrow awning of the lore office. Gringotts loomed at the end of the alley, a massive white marble monolith in the gloom. Hermione shifted her folder to her left hand. She reached over with her right and carefully slid the heavy, silver Malfoy heirloom ring off her finger. The metal was warm from her skin. The absence of it left a pale, indent on her finger that felt incredibly vulnerable. She held it out to him. Draco looked down at the ring resting in her palm. He didn't move to take it. His jaw flexed, a hard line of tension working under his skin. "Keep it," he said quietly. Hermione's breath hitched. She forced her voice to remain entirely level. "I cannot keep a Malfoy family heirloom, Draco. The contract is over. The terms dictate all borrowed assets must be returned." He closed his eyes for a brief second. When he opened them, the flat, occluded shield was cracking. Just a little. Just enough for her to see the exhaustion underneath. "I don't want it back," he said. His voice was rough. It lacked the polished drawl he used to keep the world at bay. "Take it," she insisted, pushing her hand an inch closer to his chest. "Before I drop it in the mud." He finally reached out. He didn't just take the ring. His fingers brushed against her palm, skin dragging against skin. It was the first time they had touched in months. The contact sent a sharp, painful jolt straight up her arm. He curled his fingers around the silver band, pulling his hand back slowly. "It was a pleasure doing business with you, Malfoy," she said. The words tasted like ash. They were brittle, forced, and entirely professional. Draco met her eyes. The wind whipped a strand of wet blonde hair across his forehead. He looked like he was fighting a physical war. His chest rose and fell sharply. He opened his mouth, taking a half step toward her. Hermione's heart slammed against her ribs. Say it, she thought desperately. Break the rule. Just say it wasn't just for the money. A loud crack echoed down the alley as a ministry official apparat nearby, splashing through a puddle. The official glanced over, his eyes widening slightly as he recognized Draco, his lip curling into a familiar sneer. Draco stopped. The vulnerability vanished, instantly replaced by the cold, aristocratic mask of the disgraced heir. He stepped back into the shadows of the awning, putting distance between them to protect her reputation. The moment was gone. Likewise, Granger, Draco said. His voice was completely empty. He didn't look back as he stepped out from under the awning and into the pouring rain. Hermione stood frozen against the brick wall. She watched him walk away. He didn't put up a shielding charm. He just let the rain hit him, his dark suit blending into the grey afternoon as he moved toward the marble steps of Gringotts. She clutched the wax-sealed folder to her chest, shielding the heavy parchment against the rain. The estate was hers now. The sanctuary could finally open. A cold gust of wind swept down the alley, biting through her thin cardigan. She shivered, wrapping her arms tighter around herself. She watched his silhouette disappear into the crowd. She was completely secure, yet as she stood alone on the cobblestones, she felt nothing but loss. Without clauses, the Malfoy estate was finally quiet. For the first time in 3 years, the halls of the manor were free of ministry auditors, curse-breakers, and debt collectors. The massive, crippling sum of galleons owed for legal reparations had been transferred from Gringotts to the ministry's accounts exactly 3 hours ago. Draco stood in the center of the library. He was wearing a dark, tailored suit. The cuffs were pristine. The fraying edges had been vanished. He had his legacy back. He had his name, if not his reputation, secured. He was a free man. He had never felt so utterly, suffocatingly trapped in his entire life. He poured himself a glass of Ogden's old fire whiskey. He focused on the amber liquid catching the light of the enchanted fire. The silence in the manor was wrong. It was heavy. It lacked the frantic scratching of a quill on a clipboard. It lacked the sharp, exasperated sighs that usually accompanied someone aggressively reorganizing his desk. It lacked the faint smell of vanilla and old parchment. He set the glass down on the mahogany table. He didn't take a sip. His decision was immediate and absolute. He walked to his desk. He pulled open the top drawer and took out a single sheet of blank, heavy cream parchment. He picked up his quill. He didn't hesitate. He didn't overthink it. He wrote a single line of text across the center of the page. He signed his name at the bottom, the ink a stark, unforgiving black against the cream. He folded the parchment. He slid it into the inside pocket of his suit jacket. Without another look back, he apparat. The Yorkshire estate was unrecognizable. Draco materialized at the edge of the property line, just outside the newly established anti-apparition wards. The oppressive, failing blood magic that had suffocated the grounds for months ago was completely gone. In its place, the air felt light, thrumming with a warm, steady hum of restorative magic. The crumbling stone walls of the manor were being rebuilt. Scaffolding surrounded the east wing. The roof was whole. The shattered windows had been replaced with gleaming, spelled glass. But Draco didn't look at the house. He looked at the garden. The massive, overgrown labyrinth of thorny vines and dead rose bushes was slowly being tamed. In the center of a cleared patch of soil, near a newly planted row of vibrant blue flutterby bushes, was Hermione. She was wearing a pair of faded denim jeans and an oversized, muddy sweater. Her hair was pulled back into a chaotic, messy bun, defying the silver clip attempting to hold it together. She had a streak of dirt across her forehead. She was wrestling with a particularly stubborn cluster of spiky prickly ash. She looked absolutely magnificent. Draco stepped through the iron-wrought gates. The gravel crunched under his expensive dragonhide shoes. Hermione halted instantly. She dropped the magical pruning shears. She spun around, her wand immediately dropping into her hand with lethal precision. When she saw it was him, her defensive stance didn't waver. If anything, her shoulders drew tighter. She lowered her wand, but she didn't put it away. "Malfoy," she said. Her voice was guarded. The brittle professionalism from the lore office was gone, replaced by a raw, defensive edge. "What are you doing here? The wards are impressive," he said, stopping a few feet away from her. He shoved his hands into his pockets to stop himself from reaching for her. "You tied them to the ley lines, not the bloodline." "It's a sanctuary for displaced creatures," she replied coolly, wiping the dirt from her forehead with the back of her wrist, completely missing the actual smudge and just adding a new one. Blood magic felt hypocritical. "Why are you here, Draco? Did Bletchley forget a signature? Did the ministry freeze the funds?" "No," he said. "The funds cleared. The debts are paid." She blinked. The defensive edge slipped just a fraction, revealing the exhaustion underneath. "Then I don't understand. The contract is over. We don't have to pretend anymore." "I know. So why are you here?" she asked again, her voice rising slightly, betraying a crack in her composure. Draco took a slow breath. He pulled his hands out of his pockets. He closed the distance between them, ignoring the mud ruining his shoes. He stopped when he was close enough to see the frantic pulse beating at the base of her throat. "Because I realized something," he said quietly, holding her gaze. Hermione swallowed hard. She didn't step back. She tilted her chin up, meeting his eyes with characteristic Gryffindor stubbornness. "And what is that?" "I am terrible at business," he said softly. Her brow furrowed in confusion. "You negotiated a highly lucrative settlement." "I broke the first rule of the contract," he countered, his voice dropping into a lower register. "Rule 1. This is strictly a business transaction." Hermione's breath hitched. She looked away, fixing her gaze firmly on the collar of his suit jacket. "It was just a weekend, Draco. It was a thunderstorm. The wards failed. It doesn't mean anything. You were just doing your job. My job was to convince the estate lawyers we were in love." He corrected gently, stepping closer. "My job was not to memorize the exact shade of gold in your eyes when you're angry. My job was not to learn that you tap your quill against your teeth exactly 3 times before you tell a lie." She looked up at him, her brown eyes wide and startled. "My job was not to know that you take your tea with exactly 1 sugar and a splash of milk, or that you aggressively reorganize your desk when you're feeling overwhelmed." Draco continued, his voice steady, relentless, stripping away every lie he had told himself over the last 6 months. My job was not to fall in love with you. The silence in the garden was absolute. Even the rustling leaves of the flutterby bushes seemed to stop. Hermione studied him. Her chest rose and fell rapidly. You didn't say anything. She whispered. Her voice was trembling. In the law office. You just walked away. I saw a ministry official. He said, the memory leaving a bitter taste in his mouth. He looked at me with the same disgust they all do. I am a disgraced former Death Eater, Granger. You are the golden girl. You just secured your dream project. If I had touched you in that alley, if the prophet had caught wind of it without the protection of the marriage clause, I would have ruined you. I don't care about the prophet, she said fiercely, stepping toward him, closing the final inch of space between them. I don't care about your reputation. I do, he said, his voice raw. He reached into his jacket. He pulled out the folded cream parchment and handed it to her. Which is why I brought this. Hermione looked at the parchment. Her hands were shaking as she took it. She unfolded the heavy paper. There were no complex legal clauses. There was no fine print. There were no stipulations about public appearances, required physical contact, or financial compensation. There was only a single sentence, written in his elegant, looping script. I want you. Below it, he had signed his name. Hermione kept her eyes on the parchment. A single tear escaped, cutting a clean track through the dirt on her cheek. She looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. There are no clauses, Draco said softly, raising his hand. He traced the line of her jaw with his knuckles, his touch impossibly gentle. There are no timelines. No required garlers. No performance. Just a choice. Yours. Hermione dropped the parchment. It fluttered to the muddy ground, completely forgotten. She grabbed the lapels of his suit jacket and pulled him down. Draco didn't hesitate. He caught her waist, pulling her flush against his chest, and crashed his mouth down on hers. It wasn't like the careful, measured touches they had shared in public. It wasn't the frantic, panicked comfort of the thunderstorm. It was desperate. It was hungry. It was 6 months of suppressed tension, stolen glances, and agonizing proximity finally snapping. Hermione opened her mouth to him with a soft gasp. Draco deepened the kiss, his hands tangling in her messy hair, knocking the silver clip loose. It fell to the grass, letting her curls spill over his hands. He tasted like fire whiskey and rain. She tasted like vanilla and sheer, unadulterated relief. He backed her up until she hit the trunk of a massive oak tree. He pressed his body against hers, anchoring her to the wood, pouring every unspoken word, every hidden look, and every suppressed feeling into the kiss. She kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands sliding up his chest, wrapping around the back of his neck, pulling him closer until there was absolutely no space left between them. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing heavily. The sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the Yorkshire sky in brilliant shades of violet and gold. Draco rested his forehead against hers. He kept his arms wrapped tightly around her waist, refusing to let her go. He could feel the rapid, steady beat of her heart against his chest. You ruined my suit. He murmured, his breath ghosting over her lips. Hermione let out a wet, breathless laugh. She looked down at her muddy sweater, pressed firmly against his pristine jacket. "You told me to keep to my side of the mattress." "I lied," he said, pressing a soft, lingering kiss to the corner of her mouth. "I want the whole thing." She smiled, a brilliant, blinding expression that made his chest ache. She slid her arms around his waist, burying her face in his chest. Draco closed his eyes. He pulled her back into his arms, resting his chin on the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair. He felt an overwhelming sense of peace settle into his bones. The heavy weight of his past, the crushing expectations, the sterile loneliness of the manor, it all vanished. "No more clauses," he murmured into her hair. "Just us." She held him tighter. "Just us."